Hi, welcome to Rajal Nair. This video, we are going to discuss about the lessons of project management because I am planning to create videos on different stages of project management, which is something like a series kind of stuff based upon the availability what I see. Usually, I'm planning to conduct some videos, like I'm planning to post some videos in reference to project management. Depends on the kind of stages what are all it involved in it. In this video, I'm going to explain about the project management. In that, we are going to discuss about the project initiation phase, where, because as you know, project management, nothing but managing the project, which is nothing to do with technology or domain. But one should be able in a position to understand what project management is at the same time what project initiation phase is, because this is the first phase where you will be seeing in project management. This is what we call it as project initiation. This is what generally the first phase is. So when we are talking about the project initiation phase, most of the people have, I'm not saying many, but most of the people may have a confusion over the kind of action steps which are involved in project initiation. What comes first, what comes next? This is where most of the people will have a doubt over this. So in regard to that, by just keeping all these view into account, I'm creating the kind of action steps which are required for us when we are working on the project initiation phase. So action steps that are required for project initiation is what I'm discussing in today's video. So of course, there are a couple of initiation steps which is to be taken one after another. I'll be explaining it one after another in this. The first step is that one should be able in a position to understand whenever there is a project which is selected, we need to select the project manager. This is the first thing which usually any project requires. Selecting the project manager is what the first thing which normally we do. So once we have selected the project manager, wherein we need to determine the authority of the project manager, right? So determine the authority of the project manager is what we have to do. Followed by this, whatever the required data, which is something essentially important for us to develop something, is what we call it as historical data, right? So collecting all historical data is what we have to do. Collecting the historical data or the information is what we have to do first. So first project manager we need to select with. We need to determine the authority of the project manager. Next, we need to collect all crucial historical information, wherein depends on the size of the project, in terms of the size of the project and all, where we need to divide project into the stages part. So divide project into stages, right? This is what we need to do, right? So because initiation phase, planning, implementation, design, development, all these will be there in this. Prior to that, we must be knowing about the kind of project, what all the phases are involved in it, which has to be known for us first. The next thing, we need to identify the stakeholders. At the same time, in what way these stakeholders are influencing the project. So identifying the stakeholders, followed by this, how they can impact as well as influence the project, right? This is what generally one has to be known. So identification of the stakeholders is also essentially important. So after that, we need to determine the high-level requirements, constraints, followed by the assumptions and as well as risks in reference to the requirements what we have taken. So the next thing, what is that we need to do? We need to determine the high-level requirements, which are essentially needed for us to develop the project. At the same time, what are the possible constraints? Because any application or any solution you are going to develop, there are different constraints which are involved in it. So that constraints has to be identified. At the same time, we must have a clear understanding over the assumptions. What are the assumptions should we essentially keep into an account whenever we are working on the part of the project. At the same time, we must be knowing about the kind of risk which is involved in it, because risk can be of anything. Either it could be a scheduling of risk, budget risk, operational risk, regulatory, all that. So different types of risks we have. So I'll make a separate video for risk management in maybe in coming days. So this is what generally the next stage or next step which normally we do. So whenever we have collected the high level requirements, whenever we have determined the high level requirements, we need to identify the kind of stakeholder needs, at the same time their expectations in reference to the requirements what we have taken. So the next point, what is that we need to do? Stakeholder needs in connected to the expectation towards requirements. Towards requirements. This is what one must be knowing, right? So what are all the stakeholders we have, and we must be knowing about their expectation, followed by the kind of requirements, whatever they see, all that stuff. At the same time, once stakeholders' needs, expectations, requirements will be taken into an account, we need to have a business case information. This is where generally business case document is what we call it as. So because business case document or business case information, which is essentially important for us, wherein to analyze as well as the kind of need of the project, as well as what is that we have understood so far, everything. So the understanding about the business case is what we have to make sure that understanding the business case is essentially important. At the same time, after once we have identified the business case, we need to ensure the product scope, what is that we are going to develop. Either it could be a project or a product. End of the day, make sure as well as ensure the product scope of the product, right? So whatever the product or a project are we going to develop, we must ensure that what is the scope of the product as well as project is what essentially one must be knowing here for sure. So once we have identified the scope of the project, we need to understand the strategic objectives of the organization. Because for example, you're developing a solution for one of your customer, one should able in a position to understand the kind of organizational strategic objectives which supports for the project. So need to understand need to understand 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 how the project supports the organization strategic objectives. Understanding how the project supports the strategic objectives that we need to ensure, because unless until if you are not identifying the right things and all, then there will be of no value. So that we have to make sure this we need to understand about the project support for in reference to the strategic objectives, what is that we want to achieve. At the same time, next we need to collect and use any relevant or existing agreements. Do we require to sign something like the contracts, all that stuff, where we need to understand as well as collect and use any relevant existing requirements or existing documents, I can say, existing agreements or something like existing agreements. If there is anything of that sort, what are the agreements to be required to collect? So all that existing requirements has to be collected in this way in the next step. So once we have identified the existing requirements, we need to determine the project as well as the product objectives, what is that you are going to develop. Means we need to determine the project as well as the product objectives, because make sure whatever the objectives we have determined should be matched to the business objectives, what customer wants us to achieve it. So one should be knowing about determination of project and product objectives must be known to us well in advance. So once we have done, we need to facilitate and resolve any kind of conflicts which are arised here, right? So this is where generally conflict resolution is what we need to implement if there is, which is, of course, this is something optional, which is not something mandatory in all the stages, all the steps like conflict resolution, because when there is an interaction among the kind of objectives, what is that we have taken and all, there are possibilities sometimes that conflict resolution might be taken place. So conflict resolution is what we need to understand. So once the conflict resolution followed by the standards or the steps to be taken to sustain these objectives or to clear the confusion over the objectives and all that, we must be knowing about that. At the same time, we must able in a position to be familiar to understand about the company culture as well as the structure, which is something relating to the project also. So understand the company culture followed by this structure of it, right? So this is what one should be knowing, right? Understanding the company culture, structure, all these things are essentially required here. Followed by this, we need to know about the existing process, followed by the standards. At the same time, if there is any kind of compliance requirements which will be affected on the project, should be known to us, understand. So find the existing process, find the existing process, followed by the kind of standards. If there is anything of that sort, they were following in reference to this stage itself at the same time. We need to understand about the compliance requirements as well, because what kind of compliance standards do we require to follow? All these things comes under compliance requirements. So this is where generally we need to do in the next step. So once we have identified the compliance requirements and all, we need to understand how the organization do the business. At the same time, what procedures, policies are already there in the place wherein to use the project. So we must be knowing not only about the company culture as well as the structure, one must be knowing about the organization business procedure also. So organization business procedures followed by policies is what generally one should be knowing. This is where generally organization, procedure, policies, all these things will come into account here. So once we have understood about this, we need to understand about high level basis of project planning process, which is required here. High level business process, high level business process is what we need to understand here. Whatever the high level business process do we have, so that has to be understood here. High level business process of project planning is required. Yes, for project planning, right? So for project planning is required here. This is something essentially important and know with. At the same time, we need to perform high level estimations for the project in reference to the schedules followed by the budget, whichever is required. So need to perform high level understanding over the estimations, estimating the project. At the same time, one must be knowing about the kind of schedules, what are all is required here. At the same time, we must be knowing about the budget part, all that. So these are all generally the next step which we need to see. At the same time, we need to know about the kind of estimation dates followed by the kind of deadlines to complete with. Project completion deadlines dates, whatever we have discussed with. So that has to be known here well in advance. Followed by this, we need to know about the kind of project charter, which will take, including the kind of length and level of the details. Followed by this, whatever the reasons for the selection of the format, all that. So the major important thing, especially in reference to the project management, whatever we do, in reference to the initiation itself is concerned, is to create a project charter. Unless until if you don't have a proper project charter, then developing a project initiation phase and all everything will be such difficult. After that, we need to coordinate the project initiation efforts with the stakeholders and all, including the customers. So effort of interacting with stakeholders is also required here, because what is that we need to collect all that stuff. At the same time, we also need to work with other stakeholders and all to determine high level acceptance criteria which are required for us to clarify what kind of project are we going to do and what is to develop, what not to develop. So not only to understand about and interacting with others, with stakeholders and all, even external stakeholders or other stakeholders interacting with other stakeholders is also essentially required when we are working on it, right? So this is where generally this point come into account. So once we have interacted with other stakeholders, all that, we need to understand as well as initialize the project organizations, whatever we have. We need to initiate the project organizations, what we have. At the same time, we need to identify as well as inherent any kind of milestones for the project. So understanding about the milestones of the project is also required here. So one must be knowing about the milestones of the project. What is that you're going to develop, project or a product, whatever it is, right? So milestones of the product or a project is what one must be knowing. At the same time, we need to understand about the kind of possibilities of making it project successful. Means we need to understand about the kind of constitute project success, which is essentially required for us. Constitute project success is what one should be knowing here. So this is also an essential important thing. Next, based upon the project charter, what is that we have identified so far, that has to be finalized here. Whatever the project charter we have created, that has to be finalized here. Followed by this we need to get some formal approvals from the people in reference to the project charter and all that. Whatever the formal approvals essentially required for us to perform, that we have to obtain here. This is where generally essentially one should be able in a position to understand the kind of difficulties which are something relating to that. So these are all the major important things which I have explained till project charter onwards. So whatever I have explained you so far in reference to the action steps to be taken, in reference to the project initiation, what I have taken, so that I have explained you in reference to the project charter, because once the project charter we have created, so from there onwards, whatever the information was there and whatever the formal approvals being given under this project charter, from there onwards, whatever the action steps to be taken in order to make it more convenient and better to complete the project will be taken care of by the team accordingly. So these are the action steps which normally one should be taken in project initiation. So this video is helpful for the people who wants to enroll or who wants to move towards project management side or who want to learn about the concepts of project management. I think this video is more helpful to them. For more details regarding any project management or something of that sort, please contact the details which will be given in this below this video. You can contact us at any point in time. Thank you.